On the 7th of May, UK voters go to the polls. The election comes at a challenging time for politicians. Young voters are cynical and disengaged, whilst the traditional party allegiances of older voters have weakened, making their voting behaviour more difficult to predict. In adapting to this new terrain, political campaigns are being forced to explore new ways to reach and influence voters. Developments include a greater use of technology. In contrast to the political folklore and gut feel that used to characterise election planning, party strategists are now using big data analytics to measure and manage their activities. Parties are also turning to psychology and exploring how research from the fast-growing field of behavioural science can be used to mobilise support and shape the perception of their candidates. These new ingredients were road-tested during Obama's 2012 re-election campaign. Alongside a heavy investment in technology, Obama employed a secretive team of behavioural experts who advised the campaign on how to make its activities psychologically effective. A member of that team, Todd Rogers, is now a behavioural scientist at Harvard. He's opened the door on some of the psychological methods used to counter one of the greatest challenges faced by any party, namely getting people to actually make that trip to the polling booth. In countries where voting isn't mandatory, research has shown that rational concepts like civic duty or proximity aren't enough to make people vote. Like diets or exercising, it turns out that voting is one of those things where there can be a big gap between our intention and what we really end up doing. One tactic to get round this aspect of voter behaviour is to prompt a plan. Cognitive tests have shown that people are more likely to perform an action if they've made a plan or visualised themselves doing it. So rather than simply asking someone if they'll vote, Todd Rogers and his team suggested that campaign volunteers ask questions like, what time do you expect to head to the polls on Thursday? Where do you expect you'll be coming from when you go out to vote? What do you think you'll be doing before you go to vote? Rogers estimates that such questions, by prompting the respondents to visualise what they'll be doing on the day, can more than double the likelihood that someone will vote. Peer pressure is another tactic used to mobilise voters. As a species, we're social creatures and are very sensitive to what we see as normal behaviour. Research has found that our motivation to do something is higher if we know other people are doing it. To test this, Robert Cialdini, a well-known figure in the science of persuasion, led an experiment in which different messages were tested in a hotel to see how effective they were in getting guests to reuse towels. Compared to a simple message reading, "Please reuse this towel, help save the environment," he found that guests exposed to a message saying, "The majority of guests reuse their towels," increased towel reuse by 29%. Turning up that dial on social norms, the message, "The majority of guests in this room reuse their towels," led to a 41% increase in towel reuse. So when it comes to elections, messages on the doorstep or in the media about a high turnout are more likely to motivate us than those that emphasise the negative consequences of non-voting. For example, missing out on the chance to make a difference. Social media is turning out to be an area where this kind of peer pressure can be very effective. The 2012 elections in the US saw Facebook carry out a massive experiment in voter behaviour when users were greeted with a button saying, "I'm voting," or "I'm a voter," alongside pictures in their newsfeed of friends who had already voted. The experiment proved effective in getting people to vote and mobilised target groups that were otherwise difficult to reach. But getting people to the polling station is only one side of the coin. The other side is to make sure they vote for your candidate. Rational logic says policy should play a big part here. But cognitive science tells us that whilst we're capable of rationally evaluating policy, much of our decision-making is actually unthinking, driven by unconscious preferences and biases. We are what Daniel Kahneman has called cognitive misers, taking non-conscious shortcuts to make decisions and evaluate the huge amount of information that confronts us every day. Not surprisingly, campaign strategists are keen to see how they can leverage this. Some new cognitive tricks of the trade may not be surprising. The power of first impressions, for example. Research has shown that we typically decide whether somebody looks competent or trustworthy in less than a second, far too fast for any considered weighing of the information. We're also aware of when scare tactics are at work. Science, though, has shown that there's more to this than we might think. Research into something called the endowment effect, also known as status quo bias, has shown that when confronted with decisions, we are generally more concerned with what we might lose rather than what we could gain. Playing on endowment effect helped John Major's election victory in 1992, when he focused heavily on what voters could lose if Labour got in. But campaigns also use cognitive insights, of which most of us are very unaware. Priming is a persuasion technique by which someone's behaviour or ideas about something can be guided through exposing them to unconscious cues or nudges. For example, when shopping in a wine store, unsuspecting customers can be primed to buy French wine over, say, German wine by the subtle, unnoticed playing of French music in the background. In the same way, political campaigns, often helped by the media, use priming to shape the way we judge parties and candidates. Those hidden nudges can be verbal or visual. In the US, research found that presenting people with an American flag and then asking them their voting intention significantly influenced their voting behaviour towards a Republican candidate. That's all for now. We hope this cognitive primer has prepared you to enter the voting booth with your eyes wide open about the subtle tools being used to win you over. For more information about voter psychology, please visit our website, essentiaanalytics.com, where we've compiled a list of related articles and content. There, you can also find out about the growing role played by behavioural finance and how we're helping professional investors understand their own investment psychology so they can make better, more consistently profitable investment decisions.